This is a president who's withdrawn air defense missiles from Kiev, from Ukraine, which is allowing the Russians to bombard Ukrainian cities day and daily. That is a direct consequence of Donald Trump's actions. And he's saying he won't impose sanctions for 50 days. That gives Vladimir Putin a whole summer of bombarding the Ukrainians, and they deserve better from us. Incidentally, on NATO as well, Donald Trump is also the person who said he will not possibly respect Article 5. And Vladimir Putin does not react well to those who do not stand up to him. He will take advantage of it.
We're going to turn our attention now to, I described him as this huge political whale that has landed in Scotland. President Trump is taking a break from his golf as he meets the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. They're in a meeting, as I understand it, right now, ever keeping his cards close to his chest. The US President says there's a 50-50 chance of him reaching a trade deal with the EU. Earlier, I spoke to Politico's foreign affairs reporter Gabriel Gavin, who told me that this meeting with Trump might be a do or die for a trade deal between the EU and the United States.
By Friday, unless an alternative deal is reached, the EU will be hit with 30% tariffs, which would be catastrophic for transatlantic trade. You've got senior EU officials saying that if these tariffs come in, as Trump has indicated he wants to do, huge swathes of industry will basically cease to function. It just will make the export of European goods to America in many categories completely unaffordable. It'll be a disaster, effectively, for the entire continent and its market, as well as probably having really wide-ranging repercussions for the American market and American consumers.
To discuss President Trump's visit to the UK and what might come out of a meeting with the EU Commission leader and indeed Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who he's meeting tomorrow, is the Labour MP Emily Darlington, the Conservatives Sir Christopher Chope, and the SNP MP Stephen Gethins. Stephen, let's start with you as we're talking about meetings in Scotland. Do you think that Gabriel was rather over-dramatising it then, or do you think that this is a high-stakes meeting that's taking place as we speak?
I think every meeting with Donald Trump is a high-stakes meeting. It's good to see Ursula von der Leyen come to Scotland. She's meeting up with Scotland's First Minister as well, John Swinney. She's very welcome. We obviously miss that relationship with the European Union enormously and with other like-minded states. It's always high stakes. I wish the UK would take a slightly stronger stance, given what we've seen. Donald Trump with his slapping tariffs on, breaching the international. We talked about the International Criminal Court and the international rules-based system. He's sanctioning judges, for goodness sake. What an outrageous thing to do. I'd love to see the UK adopt some of the approaches that have been taken by Canada, for example. And I think the recent, the newly elected Canadian Prime Minister standing up to the United States. I don't think that Donald Trump reacts terribly well to all this softly spoken. I think you've got to stand up for yourself. And I wish Prime Minister Starmer would take a slightly more robust approach, as so many others have done with Donald Trump.
Emily Darlington, has Keir Starmer got this wrong?
I don't think he has. I think he has stood up to him, which is why we're the only country that he's done a deal with so far, and we've done a deal on our terms. There were many things that he wanted to include in the deal, including on agriculture, that he'd been talking to the previous Conservative government about reducing our standards in chlorinated chicken. And Keir went in there and said, absolutely not. And we still had our tariffs reduced, and we are the ones that, the only place he's done the deal with. And I'm really, really pleased he's meeting with Ursula von der Leyen, because actually our economies are so interlinked with Europe's. If there's going to be something very damaging in Europe, inevitably will affect markets here and companies here in the UK. And so actually a deal with the EU will be a US-EU deal will be a good deal also for the UK.
So, Christopher, to what extent do you think we've just lucked out with Donald Trump? That whatever you think of him personally and the way he is acting domestically and internationally, he's still the most powerful politician in the world. And the fact that he seems to have an affinity for Sir Keir Starmer, for the UK, for Scotland, is something that we can play to our advantage.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm surprised that Stephen doesn't seem to recognise the investment that Donald Trump has put into Scotland, and the fact that he should be being embraced by the Scots as an asset rather than a liability. And I think that now I don't often praise our Prime Minister, but I think that he has played the Donald Trump negotiations pretty effectively. And Donald Trump is a president who likes to engage in transactions, as he was saying in the clip you had earlier from Scotland. And So this is a transactional basis on which the EU is going to have to negotiate, and good luck to them. But I'm a great supporter of Donald Trump, because I think he has single-handedly reinforced NATO. He has ensured that NATO is not full of sleeping partners who don't contribute, but actually people who want to defend the free West and are prepared to commit resources to do that.
Is this in spite of his authoritarian and anti-democratic tendencies?
Well, yeah, he's the president of the United States. Anybody who's a strong president could always be open to accusations of being or authoritarian, but I certainly wouldn't describe him as anti-democratic. He has got the largest democratic mandate, as I understand it, of any president of the United States for years and years.
Stephen, so Christopher mentioned Scotland should be more welcoming of Donald Trump. What have you noticed on the ground amongst your constituents and fellow Scots about Donald Trump's visit?
Right. His mum might be Scottish, or his late mum might be Scottish, but that doesn't mean to say that my constituents are going to let him off the hook for his politics. And let's take Christopher up on the NATO point there. This is not only a president who slapped tariffs on the United Kingdom. There were no tariffs last year when he came to power and Labour were there. There are tariffs there. They're still there, and they're damaging industries across the United Kingdom. There's no trade deal with the United States that Christopher and his Brexit colleagues told us would be the easiest trade deal in the world between the UK and the United States. You know, we're so much poorer having left the European Union, so much more isolated. And on NATO, this is a president who has withdrawn air defence missiles from Kiev, from Ukraine, which is allowing the Russians to bombard Ukrainian cities day and daily. That is a direct consequence of Donald Trump's actions. And he's saying he won't impose sanctions for 50 days. That gives Vladimir Putin a whole summer of bombarding the Ukrainians, and they deserve better from us. Incidentally, on NATO as well, Donald Trump is also the person who said he will not possibly respect Article 5. And Vladimir Putin does not react well to those who do not stand up to him. He will take advantage of it. So
and Article 5 is if one country gets attacked, all countries will respond.
All countries.
Yeah.
Forgive me. Sorry, Nick. Yes, that's when everybody gets attacked. And he's undermined that principle as well. So, you know, the rest of Europe needs to pull together in terms of our common defence. We need greater common European defence. That's, to be fair, something the Canadians recognise. The Canadians would be in with that as well. So Donald Trump is bad news for the economy. He's bad news for our common security, not least everything that's going on in Ukraine, and he's bad news for the international rules-based system that keeps us all safe. And I'm afraid it doesn't matter where your mum's born. I'll disagree with you if they're your politics.
So, Christopher, I just want to put that NATO point directly to you. He has tried to weaken NATO. I know he's got defence spending up in European member countries, but he has certainly not hobbled NATO to a certain degree with this courting of Putin. Well,
I think rather naively, and I think a lot of people said it at the time, that he thought he could do a deal with Putin, and he hasn't been able to achieve that. And now he's coming, I think, round to recognising that he was wrong to put faith in such a deal, and he's now reinforcing his support, both military and otherwise, for Ukraine. So that's good news. And I think that if we were talking to Donald Trump himself, he might admit that he read Putin wrongly and assumed that Putin would actually genuinely keep to his word and try to get a deal, a peace deal, which Putin manifestly is not trying to do.
Well, Weekend Drive on Times Radio would always welcome a call in from Donald Trump, just to put that on the record. Emily Darlington, is there any good news about Trump's visit? What can you see that might come from this that might have any benefit to the United Kingdom?
Well, as I said, I think if he does a deal with the EU, that will benefit the UK. I think that's really, really quite positive noises. He wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. He loves a deal. That's what he's like. But again, when a deal with the American people and we have to go through Donald Trump to do that, it is important. We can disagree with Donald Trump on many issues. He's been asking us to lessen our Online Safety Act. The reality is we've turned around and said absolutely not. We can work together on other issues, and we are very, very integrated in terms of our military defense, and those relationships need to be maintained, particularly at general to general level, and they have been, because it is really, really quite crucial. But there are also red lines for us, and things like agricultural standards, Online Safety Act are not things that we're going to compromise for him. But you have to have a good relationship with him for him to really respect that and listen to you and still be able to negotiate down your tariffs.
Isn't that fair enough, Stephen? You listed exactly where you think he is wrong on a number of subjects, but you've got to be in a position whereby you can talk to people and you can hopefully come to a compromise arrangement, even if you have to hold your nose whilst you're doing it.
You know, I don't disagree with engagement with anybody, for that matter. You know, but I think that, for example, the state visit was wrong, rolling out the red carpet. I think you're absolutely right.
Why?
Because I think you're rewarding bad behaviour. Somebody who's undermining NATO, who's undermining the international rules-based system, who's slapping tariffs onto your businesses and damaging them, and you're on day one giving them something that he wants and not leaving that in reserve. Now, for example, John Swinney quite rightly will go into bat for Scottish businesses, for the whisky industry, for the food and drink industry, for the tourist sector. You know, we've got a great tourist sector, and golf's really important to us, and there are investors from across the United States. But I think you can have a robust stance with them. The problem is the UK has made itself so much weaker sitting outside the European Union, and whereas the European Union has got so many arms at its disposal economically and increasingly from a security perspective, the UK has been left much more isolated, and that's a position of weakness, and Donald Trump does not react well to weakness. And finally, just on the point, Donald Trump is leaving air defense missiles in the United States and in Poland, refusing to let them cross the border, refusing to put greater sanctions on Russia for what he called 50 days. He's not doing it. Doesn't look like he's going to do it. And I'm afraid pussyfooting around Donald Trump is not the way that you act in order to get a reaction from him. There are air defense missiles in Poland right now that the Americans are stopping from getting in.
Okay, we're going to change subjects in a moment, but my thanks to Stephen Gethins, the SNP MP, who you heard just then. Before that, Emily Darlington, Labour, and Sir Christopher Chope is also with us on the politics panel here on Times Radio.